Well, that makes it official. We have officially started, and thank you for coming. This is a really special night for us. We have not been here to hear a featured poet since February of 2020. So it's been over 2 years of living in purgatory. And it is so nice to be back here at the Library Society, in this wonderful building. And this is, the society part of the Poetry Society, to be together with other people and not to be, trying to do it alone on our computers. And that's, sorry for all of us, all the people joining on Zoom. I know that's the way that you want to participate tonight, but it's not as good. So I hate to say it. But anyway, this is by the way, I'm Jim Lundy. If you don't know me, I'm the president of the Poetry Society. I always fail to introduce myself, and but I thought I'd say that. And this is the 690th meeting of the Poetry Society since the first one. And right now, from memory, I'm going to recite all 690 readings. Now, you know what? In the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. But and this, like so many others, are special. It's a special event. We never know how history is going to look back on this night. So we're all lucky to be here. I don't think I have any other announcements. We'll just get on with our opening poet. And to introduce him is Celeste. So come on up here.
Good evening. It's my honor tonight to introduce Arthur Mcmaster. After a 30-year career as an intelligence officer, working the last several years in counterterrorism, Mcmaster chose a second career, that of writing and teaching, one that he prefers. Arthur earned his MFA in creative writing from the University of Florida. He's a natural teacher and has taught literature and creative writing courses in Florida and South Carolina for several years. In 2017, he was the winner of the of the Poetry Society of South Carolina's DuBose and Dorothy Hayward Society Prize. He's published poems in such journals as North American Review, Rhino, Rattle, the James Dickey Review, and Poetry East, and he's written 4 books. His 2013 memoir is titled Need to Know: Journey of an American Intelligence Officer to College Professor and Poet. His previous 2 books of poems are The Spy Who Came Down with the Cold and Givings and Misgivings by Main Street Rag in 2019. His newest book is The Whole Picture Show, published in 2021 by Revival Press in Limerick, Ireland. In the Colorado Review, Shannon Winston writes about Mcmaster's latest book. As the title suggests, she says, the whole picture show is cinematic in nature. It moves frame by frame, from stories about friendship to narratives of family, travel, and the arts. Mcmaster draws a parallel between writing and observing on the one hand and the photographic process on the other. Artistic and literary lineages, as well as form, are playful and elusive. They flicker before the speaker and before the reader like cinema lights. Poet David Kirby says of the whole picture show, these beautifully restrained poems seem to have been written by a poet in a toga and laurel leaves with an energy drink in one hand and a skateboard in the other. A quester about to go out, see everything, and return to his fireside to write. Music, cocktails, photographs, friends, relatives, books, even a pistol or 2. Everything is in these poems. I wish that I had written them. High praise indeed. Mcmaster now lives in Greenville, South Carolina with his wife, Sue. They have 2 children, Kelly and Scott, Though the writing world knows him as Arthur Mcmaster, since marrying into the family several years ago, I affectionately call him Uncle Bill. Please welcome him to Charleston.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, Jim. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim. Wonderful. Thank you, Celeste, and my nephew, a talented nephew, Jason. Can you hear me okay? And Atsuro, so happy to be sharing this time with you, sir. Put on my peepers. You know, with this horrible war in the Ukraine on everyone's mind, and I beg your indulgence for this, I just want to open with a short poem from Adam Zagajewski, who was born in Lwów, Poland, which then became Lviv, when the land was ceded to the Ukrainians after the war. It's a short poem. I think it tells us something. He would have no idea, of course, the context in which I would be reading it here. The poem is called Smoke. Too many elegies, too much memory. The scent of hay and a white heron flies uncertainly across a field. We know how to bury the dead. We don't want to kill, but potent moments of light elude our spells. My room is heaped with dreams piled high like rugs inside a stuffy Oriental shop, and there is no room for new poems now. The roe deer won't take flight. She tries to prophesy. No one pays homage to the gods. An angry prayer is stronger. Linden flowers, an open wound, smoke rises over the low-lying towns and enters our homes. Our homes fill with wholeness. God bless them. Okay, for my poems, and I thank you so much for the introduction about my new book. I must begin, however, with a recognition of my friend Eugene Platt, who tipped me off to the work done at Revival Press, him showing the way with his splendid Nuda Veritas, which we heard from Eugene last month. Thank you so much. And therefore, I would like to begin with a poem from Ireland, when Sue and I spent a month there several years ago. It's called First Notes on a Connemara Poem. Driving the broken mountain pass, lakes like shimmering nickel, we inch past random sheep and wood lorries coming at us too fast. Arriving then unexpectedly upon the gray stone castle of Kylemore, asleep at the edge of tiny letterfrack, guarding all souls to the west. Inconstant colored mountains loom above. These are the 12 bends, and their fishing men help you after you've been turned around good. What you need now is a glass of stout and a peat fire. The drink is smooth and both warming, and the wind blows you backward when you try to leave. Look here, one single white primrose hangs on against the rain foraging across the bay. We breathe it all deeply as the sky brightens. And you know we could spend an eternity in the Connemara countryside, walking and writing, yet lonely, as the man said, as a cloud. Okay, this is the poem, thank you, Celeste. This is the poem that won the one of the DuBose and Dorothy Hayward prizes a few years ago. It's called The Girl with the Just Pretend Jump Rope. The girl with the just pretend jump rope hardly misses a beat, if that's what one counts or beats. Or is it not a beat, but a jump? Well, she is good. Mornings before her bedroom mirror, she does what amounts to several series of repetitions. She'd do more if she could, but the virtual work is tiring. Oh, and I might mention that she's no longer truly a girl. That term shared among lady friends is merely a convention. Who would take issue? A pleasantry. She can whirl that just pretend rope as sweetly and deftly as any teen, which is who she sees when she looks into that wizened old glass, when she focuses on those days, on what is seen yet unseen. All of it, all of them now past. For no one told her when she was growing up that our days, our moments, especially the very best, are transitory. There is no going back, no loving cup for making it to this age, for the death of lovers, the loss of sons. Finding poem number 3 here. Okay, you guys remember Borders Bookstore? It was wonderful, Borders. I don't know what I missed more than Borders. Okay, and maybe you've actually even found a sales slip in a book, a used book that you found somewhere. I'd love to find somebody else's sales slip in a book. This is called Wheaton, Illinois, and I've written it as a prose poem. I am reading a modern novel by one of my favorite Brit writers, a book I find first purchased some 7 states away from where we sit now in my comfy Carolina sunroom, a melodious Stan Getz on the turntable, a book discovered nearly 19 years ago, one June day, a Sunday, I deduce, perhaps with an orange scone, all purchased at 9:28 a.m. at a smart chain bookstore that no longer exists. I know this because I have just come to the facing pages secreting an unforeseen fading cash register receipt. My kindred spirit paid full price plus 6.75% Illinois sales tax. I wonder if that individual loved the book as much as I, the whimsy, the fumbling sex, the narrow doors into human honest intimacy, the broadsides at America's needy academia. A book I now value all the more since I picked it up 2 days ago at my college in an open exchange kind of thing. Wheaton, Illinois, a city leaning liberal, 30 miles west of Chicago. This now empty building, catty corner from Aaron's Classy Nails and Spa, tucked behind it one massage envy operation. The building itself in its 10th year of vacancy. Stan Getz, now gone quiet, I think of the countless protagonists, their brio, their earthy cups of angst, once purchased in Wheaton, 9,000 square miles of potential, a vulnerable human possibility. What's next? Ah, yes. This poem, and I tend to write poems that have to do with choices that we make. Choices made and not made, I suppose I should say. This poem is called Distance. My wife leaves the room when the game gets close, knows her presence near the TV will cause even the ablest guard to falter, to toss the ball out of bounds, dribble into a tight zone, to choke, freeze up, forget how little time remains. And so she decamps for the kitchen or scurries off the clock to the window to see what else is going on or not going on, which is what I did those months Bill Delaney was dying when I failed to go visit him even once, as if my absence from his bedside might keep him from fouling out. A young All-American assessed his final technical, and me thinking that if I paid no attention to his symptoms, they would have no power over me or over him, because absenting oneself from those moments when the game is close and on the line has always worked for us, hasn't it? Okay. There we go. If I hadn't marked all these ahead of time, I'd just be scrambling through this. So, oh yes. I had the occasion to teach at USC Upstate when it was called USC Spartanburg. And then I went to Converse and worked there for 12 years. I joined Converse College faculty in 2006. And on one occasion, I had an opportunity to teach work from the Transcendentalists, which particularly interested me. And so I wrote a poem called What My Students Teach Me About Darkness and Light. No good in touting the difficult and long forgotten lessons of the Transcendentalists. No point in pointing out the timelessness of 28-year-old Henry David Thoreau, camped 2 miles from town in his peevish cabin, needing only one decent pencil to record his observations from last night's stars, to contemplate the temptation of dreams, the slender fingers of dreams, ever reaching for meaning as he wakes and rises and steps from the clapboard cabin, perhaps to rendezvous once more with the unsettled Margaret Fuller, who will have left to discover her purpose apart. No earthly reason to encourage them to find something in Emerson's nature that might chide them, that could inform and infuse their day as they turn the pretty stalks of their heads as one to the morning sun beaming in from the windows between us like so many drowsy sunflowers seeking only the brightness of this day. I wrote a few poems that have to do with COVID, with how we dealt with it or didn't, and what people might have done to accommodate themselves to that scare. This poem is called The Checkout Girl. The checkout girl at Publix this evening, 6 items or less lane, asked me if I was having a good day, or something like that. Hard to tell with both of us masked and a plexiglass barrier between us. Me just setting down 2 fat deli sandwiches, one redolent of pastrami, onions, and mustard, the other a ham on rye, onto the black rubber conveyor thingy that immediately melded my stuff with that of the ponytail just ahead. She with a bottle of Robitussin and a pack of Twinkies. Also an armload of coughing, kicking toddler. The child unhappy about whatever he had just been denied. The mom smiling at the checkout girl, using her free hand to swipe at the spittle phlegm coming from her little one's mouth, wiping it off on her much swollen belly, adjusting him on her hip, eyeing my yummy subs and telling us both to have a nice day. Here's one more apropos of the COVID scare. My wife tells me, let's hear no more Pagliacci, because Leoncavallo's sad and ill-fated lovers just don't go with the lemon chicken pasta she's stirring up in her non-stick skillet for tonight. 2 zesty Caesar salads already on the table, a chilled Pinot Gris, wanting nothing so much as to divert us from the CNN coverage we know will claim its needful place before us soon enough. Overseeing 2 hot cups of decaf and 1 shared slice of red velvet cake left over from my birthday, when we had only half as many casualties. 1 short week ago, we sitting ever so tight, prepared to take in the revised toll. So I put on Don McLean's American Pie instead. There is number 7. Ah, yes, more choices, more choices that we make. This is choices and chances. We almost never have any Joseph Haydn on in the sunroom these mornings, gracing the wife's golden French toast or my world-famous scrambled egg surprise. A nice rasher or two of crisp bacon for each. And that fast, I understand the vicissitudes of choice. I mean, Papa Haydn wrote 104 symphonies. And while born just 40 years later, Beethoven struggled to write 9. How could we pick one Haydn and diss the rest? And just how tough would it be for me to find and locate my old Ray Lutz, my erstwhile army buddy, knowing via Wikipedia there are as many as 5,217 guys named Ray Lutz bopping around in the US now. No doubt 1 or 2 more by the end of the year. A veritable cottage industry of Ray Lutzes, not to be confused with the internationally acclaimed Rudolf Lutz, a Swedish harpsichordist, or fiddling with the order, one Lutz Rathenau, a German dissident writer who may or may not know Ray, and who also speaks a passable German. So I'll just go put some Rob Luft on the dazzling young London guitarist who probably doesn't know Ray either. All right, one more here. If you've driven around Florida, especially down 95, you know how maddening the tolls and the construction, endless construction. Okay, this is notes for Rand McNally. This will be my final poem. Well, maybe it's not my final poem, but it'll be my last poem tonight. Hope it's not my final poem. Do I need yet another map of Florida? I've not been back for years, though the pensive flatness and scrub pine to either side of I-95, now that we have crossed the St. Mary's River, triggers many images. Jacksonville's unending, querulous highway construction, the tolls in and around Orlando, the beckoning of redneck raceways and weary orange stands. None of this shows up on maps. Not the tragedy of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, not the agitating, nasty speed traps along 301. And what about the anger and perceived iniquities of so much of benighted Panhandle, better known as Lower Alabama? Certainly not the shame of Mar-a-Lago. On the other hand, no map could begin to show the numinous sunsets off Louis' back porch at the westernmost tip of Key West, or the brilliance of Cocoa Beach's pier when the sun rises up to shock the Atlantic, typically just past 6 a.m. Have you ever seen the horse farms north of Alachua? I find no notes or legends for locating even one of my long ago student poets. Not Christie, who will have her own students, not Tim with his chapbooks, not the bright doe-eyed Hope, though I'd love to. Meanwhile, families of manatees, not a few cut and battered by boaters, go on rolling about in the waters off Homosassa for the peace and contentment of no one in particular, save perhaps for themselves.
Before I get started, this is a beautiful book. It's almost an art book. It even has photographs in it, and it's for sale. And Atsuro could sign it. Did you sign mine first? I'm living in an apartment and I have a dog. Has to get out. Anyway, it's a beautiful book. It even smells good. Arthur Riley is what I call a natural poet. I'm not sure what that means. It's just a feeling I have about some poets. I don't think Atsuro Riley ever sat in a poetry workshop or took a course in Poetry 101. I think he came to poetry in his own way, in his own time. He once told me that he writes in a round room, and the first part of his process is to draw pictures and then tack them up to the wall, so that it starts with visual images, but somewhere in the process, the poems pass from language into music. His new book, Heard-Hoard, is a musical suite. It has choruses, duets, and solos. There's also narrative, and there are characters, human and otherwise, and the sense of place is alive. This vernacular is unique. You can't read it as if you know what the next word is. The narrative is ripe with hyphenated words, compound words, words from South Carolina that he might have heard in childhood, words from the backwoods and hunting camps, and words that may be made up. Weed and branglead snuffle path, dew sparks glacifying the crabgrass. I'm going to remember glacify. So you glacify me, baby. His is not all about the charming low country. And as in Romy's order, there is an undercurrent of pain, and there is violence from the violence of nature itself. His style is completely his own, but you will hear echoes of Hopkins, Stevens, Bishop, and other poets of lyric and contemplative modes. He may live in San Francisco, but I don't know of another artist that depicts the low country as vividly as he does. So let's listen to Atsuro Riley. We are going to be told some stories, but at first, they may sound like music.
Wow, thank you, Richard, so much. It's such a pleasure to be back here at the Poetry Society of South Carolina and here in the beautiful Charleston Library Society. Some of you may have noticed that the building has been renovated. I first came to the Charleston Library Society when I was 9. I went to school in the North area. And so we came on a field trip in a bus. And so when I was here in 2010 with my reading from my first book, I remembered being here as a school child. So it's great to be back here after the pandemic and in this historic space. Anyway, it's wonderful to be back here to see old friends, Richard Garcia and Catherine. And Richard, that was just a really beautiful introduction. I really appreciate some of the things that you've noticed about my work and about this book in particular. So I thought I'd read tonight from the new book. I know there are some people who prefer the first book, so I'm happy to, I brought a few poems that are kind of exciting to read out loud. So if anyone wants to hear something from the first book, I have a couple of ideas about that. So we could do a little request line later. What I like to do in readings like this is to tell a little bit about, because you don't have the book in front of you and some of you may not have read it yet, to give you a little bit of an experience of the book by telling you a little bit of the backstory and glossing a few of the words and all that so that you can have a full experience. So the first thing I like to talk about with this book is, oh, I forgot to say hello to everyone who's Zooming in tonight. I really appreciate you coming. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this weird title, Heard-Hoard. So now, if you were an Anglo-Saxon back in the day, it wouldn't seem unusual to you at all. It'd be perfectly commonplace to be talking about what they like to call the word hoard. So that incredible ancient idea of kind of storehouse or storeroom of vocabulary, of language, the place from which all of our language comes, the place where we store the language for future use, and so on. Seamus Heaney called it a strong room of vocabulary. And so what's interesting about everyone who writes about the word hoard, and again, this goes all the way back to Old English and to the Anglo-Saxons after that, is they're always talking about it in two ways that are interesting and fun to think about. One is the word hoard is always locked. It's always tightly sealed, right? So why do we lock up things? We lock up things generally because they're valuable and we don't want anything to happen to them. And we don't want anybody to take our stuff, right? So that's really interesting about the word hoard, that it's a locked place or a tightly sealed place. And the other thing is that, and this goes right to the heart of if I have a poetics, some of what Richard was talking about, if I have a poetics, this would certainly be central to my poetics. And that is that in this word hoard, in this storeroom, in this strongbox, there are things. So remember, we were talking about language, we were talking about words, but they are actually talked about as things, as palpable objects that you can handle. So that goes right to an Anglo-Saxon sense of what language is, which is a concrete thing. It is a thing, an object that you hold in your hand. So let me just see if I have any more ideas about this. So we're talking about the language of a culture, of a community, of a society, of an individual. And we're also talking here in this book, we're in the land of the originary, the rudimental, the beginning of stuff, the radical, and that's radicle. So in botany, a radical is the beginning of a plant. So right after the seed, up comes a little radical, and that radical, everything that plant is going to be as an adult plant is prefigured in that little bit of radical. So the Darwins were very, very fascinated with the radical and how it prefigured everything and how it was kind of the sense organ of the plant. So we're in the land of beginnings. And that's all I want to say about that. So Heard-Hoard then is my kind of playful riff on word hoard and expansion of it. So a kind of slightly more expansive cousin to the word hoard, in which we crack it open a little bit and admit a little more. So in addition to words and language and phrases, vocabulary, we're going to now admit tales and stories and gossip and the things that one has heard. So ergo, Heard-Hoard. Now, the first poem in this Heard-Hoard really starts to circle us up in the way that we are circled up here tonight and have not been, right, joined together in a couple of years. So it's a really special night. It's a really special human activity that we humans like to do. We, since the beginning of human history, have liked to form a circle and have someone enter the circle and tell a story or sing a song, right? Hum a tune, tell a tale, pull something out of the hoard. And that's what this first poem in the book is about. The first kind of major poem in the book is called Call, and it really enacts a circling up. And before I get to that, I just want to share one little bit of something that I found from the writer Edouard Glissant. He writes in, he's from Martinique, and so his writing was in French and Creole. And this is a very beautiful thing that he's talking about, this circling up. We are speaking now of the circle drawn around the storyteller by the shadows of night. On the borders of this ring, the children who will relay the word are beside themselves. Their bodies are hot with the fever of day. Their eyes grow larger in this time that does not go by. Now, these children understand nothing of the formulas, nor do they catch all of the allusions. But the man with the stories speaks to them first. He is quick to guess when they will shiver, wide-mouthed in terror, or laugh to cover up their fear. His voice comes from beyond the seas and draws us in. So that's a little setup for this poem, Call. And in this poem, Call, we're talking about the story man. And as we all know here tonight, it could very well be the story woman or the story person, but I needed, for the syllabic count, it needed to be the story man. So you'll have to give me that. And then I'm going to quote in the poem some little snatches of stories, snatches of tales, and some little bits of kind of local village gossip, but I'll try to inflect that in a way that you'll know when that comes. And so this is Call. It starts with the lamp that lamped our night, our dirt. Cause of this where-balded red mud ring going glow. The old ever voice with the tear through it, intonating, rivering. Souls and appetites from holler, brink, and gully, lured and drawn. The story man encircling us, binding us by lard torch and ditty. So, in the beginning, and it came to pass. Wait till I tell you. Tail flicker from his crackling throat, blackening kerosene cattail held high. Some say what she gripped right then wasn't vine, but bull snake. Hadn't they clung tooth and claw to branch and bark? When the creek bend child got beat, got hided fresh, his mama broke her switch. Damned if dog daisies, beanstalks didn't fank up in the spokes. Our pulse, our crescendo timbrous amphiglade of bug chirk, burgeon. Well, was it green as this ever? Bright breath of the lamp that lamps our night, our dirt. So now the story man has gotten us started off, and now we hear some stories. As we all know here, but brothers and their dramas have been the basis of many stories going back and back through history, and many of the most indelible stories, like say Cain and Abel, center around two brothers. So this is a low country version of that, if you will, where two brothers are skipping rocks, and it's called Sunder. A last rock skip hurl storm, crazing river glass, the closest they ever were. In right lock stitch, snared and split some fire supper, cooked on sticks. By dawn, the older brother took to chucking what bottle frags he could find and crud oysters across. The high-pitched younger blacked our waters with a yowl. Lord, the sound such as rose from him, carried so, carved into us, clings. Hadn't they clung tooth and claw to branch and bark, came a man and truck to take them off. Diesel those boys off away. Some say somewhere's up country, inland. Where it was, they landed. Why? Nobody, not them, knows. Nobody, not them, knows just how they humped and grovelled home, what road they'd graved, what woods crisscrossed, which creeks, which trains they'd hopped, who helped. Came safe home, sure, but blank as houses. Came safe home as him, and him as evermore, not them. So Richard and I were talking about this poem a little bit before we started. It's an experience that he apparently knows a little bit about. The basic frame of the story here, or the tale, is an old one. It's one I heard for many years, and one indeed that I witnessed a little bit. So the idea is that poor mothers basically sell their children off for a couple of weeks, a month, a summer, to go and do some sort of work in the fields. So I don't know if people here in the Low Country know, but there is some tobacco farming in our state, in South Carolina, more upstate, and more in the central part of the state. There's some tobacco farming, and those of you who know about tobacco farming know that it's real hot, sticky, tarry, horrible, itchy business. It's a real hairy thing in every respect. So this poem has to do with that basic setup. Let's see. The poem is in 3 panels, I like to call them, and each of them has a little title, which I'll give you. And the first panel is done in a kind of a call and response. So there's the kind of official account, let's say the grown-up account, an official account on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side of the page are these italicized lines responding to what was just said. And that's probably the young people who are doing the work. They're probably responding. And then the second panel takes place in a bunkhouse. And there I talk a little bit about the wonderful peas that we have here in the Low Country. So we all know about black-eyed peas, and we all know about Crowder peas. And we have, of course, our Sea Island red peas, and we have our Whiteacre peas, but those get mentioned in here. And, you know, when I read these poems in other places, of course, I have to explain to them what Crowders are, but I don't have to do that with you. And then, of course, the third panel has to do with Highway 52, which we all know. And so this poem is called Striplings, and the first little panel is called Field. Truck a passel, a poke of wildling boys. We call ourselves, our pack, the pickup slaves. Up country, loosed from mothers, farmed out for scratch by mamas. Pale, pink back tobacco crew, bossed by peeled stick, breakback, donkey switch. Tarred cropper forced cropper line, right far afield past Social Knob, dark welty field near Luris. Bunkhouse. Most nights, the boy they called Tynan suppered us with scrapple from a can, or some black eyes he'd have road begged, a quarter peck of Crowders scrounged off vines. The broad back skin on the tallest boy, a ripening welt weave, a lattice. Last good gloam minute after work, we'd strip off there in the side yard, yelping, taking turns, de-tarring, unburning, arc aiming, cool hose spray, each on each. 11 of us. Chigger scritches, scablets, 11 of us. None of us clean. Where the boss of us bore down on us. Our rank of bedrolls on the floorboards, one and one and one. 11 of us ranked sack beds on floorboards, boots of, black breath of, the boss of us bearing down on us. Ain't none of us, not a one of us clean. After road. And so the heaving boys got yoked and dragged toward Candy's stop up Highway 52 one night and dumped. It's just one lighthearted comedy after another. Because see, I took out a few poems that are in the book, so you don't get any padding. You just get one misery after another. So this one's a little brighter. So this poem has a little head note to help you with the reading, and it refers back to the poem we just read. And then the head note is Candy Stop up Highway 52. So it lets you know that this little dramatic monologue takes place there somehow. So the central image in this poem, eventually, the poem is called Moth. So the central image in this poem eventually is the process of transformation that a moth goes through, right? So moving from that kind of pupa stage that one, the kind of originary pupa stage that one is born into the beautiful evolved form, of the butterfly. Now, there's a wonderful cameo appearance, which is of a special interest to people here in the Low Country. So there's a cameo in here of an orphanage, and it's a nod to the Jenkins Orphanage, which is in North Charleston, very near where I grew up. And I don't know how many people here know, but the Jenkins Orphanage started to do music instruction in the orphanage for the children, and they taught them jazz. So many of the jazz greats whose names you would recognize over our, before our lifetimes and during our lifetimes were orphans at the Jenkins Orphanage School. So this band became quite famous. They had a little nickname, Them Lambs, and they traveled around the world. They went to Europe. They went to the World's Fair. They performed at presidential inaugurations. And if you get a chance, you can YouTube some little news footage of them performing on the sidewalk, like at the in front of the White House and so on. It's fantastic. Anyway, there's a little nod to them in here. So when I say gristly, I'm really talking about Gristly, like the nastier parts of meat. And that's about it. Okay, moth. I've been Candy since I came here young. My born name keeps, but I don't say. To her who my mama was, I was pure millstone, cumbrance. Child ain't but a toe sack full of bane. Well, I lit out right quick, hitched and so forth, legged it, was rid. Ackaby at first, then Thicket hid, then Wadmalaw, out to Nash's meat yard, Obie's juke. At County Home, they had this jazz horn, drumbeat, orphan band, them lambs. They let me bide and listen. This gristly man, he came, he buttered me, then took me off, swore I was surely something, let me ride in back. Something, snared, spat on thing, being more like moresoever what he meant. No, I'd never sound what Bruntsy called me, what he done, had I 100 mouths. How his mouth repeats on me down the years, everlastingly riveled looking like rot fruit. Wasn't it runched up like a grub? First chance I inched off back through bindweed, I was gone. Nothing wrong with gone as a place for living, whereby a spore eats air when she has to, where I fairly much clung for peace. Came the day I came here young, I mothed myself. I cleaved apart. A soul can hide like moth on bark. My born name keeps, but I don't say. Okay, this will be more fun, I promise. So this is a little complicated to, there are a lot of notes for this poem to set it up, but it's central to the book, so I like to read it. And it kind of lets you know what I'm up to in this book. And it's some of the ideas here are thrilling to me. So the first thing I want to tell you is that I found a note which I apparently wrote to myself in my little box of index cards, and Richard talked about my little drawings. So I drew a picture of a creek, and next to that picture of a creek, I wrote this note. And the note says, his mama told him no stories. He wasn't fed none of the essential stories. So that's a painful thought, that, that your parents who are there to give you the essential forms that you need to make a soul, to make a life. What if you didn't get them? What if you weren't ever told once upon a time? How would you live in the world? So that was the idea. And of course, that's a painful idea to contemplate. So I outsourced it. I think I outsourced it to the creek. So most of the time I feel that this poem is voiced, in addition to being voiced by a human, is also being voiced by a creek. And then somehow that's easier to take. And then, so the poem therefore has a head note speaking of this creek and this creek's mother. And the head note is, we seen his mama, she dry and scant, right? So, so there are a couple of words you'll hear. So succor, S-U-C-C-O-R, the kind of tenderness and comforting that we all want and especially need right now. Epiphytes, everyone will remember. We have the most famous epiphyte in the world here, the Spanish moss that hangs everywhere. So just like in the last poem where there was talk of eating air, those epiphytes eat air. And then, of course, everyone here knows all about the cypress knees at Magnolia and Middleton and so on, the little knobbly stumps that stick up. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know about cypress knees. And then we've already talked about radicle, and that's central to this poem, this idea of R-A-D-I-C-L-E being kind of not only the beginning of a plant, but the beginning of a nerve or a vein in the body, or in this poem, the kind of originary beginnings of anything, the kind of originary particle of anything. So that's enough. So this poem is called Creek Throat. By hook or by bent, I guttle the rudimental stories. I'm all in scoop, sup, and swallow by dint of birth, of shape. Were you hallow nursed on river source upon a time, or the rocky breasts forever? I was not. I learned to lie in want for sucker food, for forms. I gaped, I gulped for what I got. Nowadays, to need to come by what comes by here comes natural and needs no bait. Just steep dead still as a black snake creek and wait. My chokesome weeds, my crook, my lack, my epiphytes, my cypress knees. This old appetite is chronic as tides, on foot or by boat by night. Please come slake me with radical stories. So this next poem, Richard mentioned duets. So this is actually a duet that's not yet a duet or isn't a duet, wishes it would be a duet. So it's written in the, your English teacher would call it the subjunctive mood, the subjunctive imaginary mood. So this is a poem that has not happened. And the brothers in this poem wish it could happen. So if these brothers could speak, or if they could sing, or if they could form a duet, this is what they would say. As you know, or as you heard tonight, there is at least one pair of brothers in this book that are silent. So that kind of prepares the way for this poem. And this, let's see. There is a word here, chord, and we're talking about a musical chord since it's a duet. We're also going to use here the old word crudel, which is a word I love, and that's like the low, faint humming of the low, faint music of birds, or the low humming of a tune. There are lots of Scottish songs that use the word crudel to talk about a lover. Let's see. So we're talking about a brace of brothers, and so there's a little head note. But that brace of brothers pleached a song. And to pleach, for example, trees would be to grow them in a way so that the tops of the trees and their leaves and branches would intermingle. And so what's interesting about that for this poem is that they're single trees that then grow together to form a single thing. So that's important for a duet. And then let's see. So you will remember from maybe you're a librarian, that a gibbet is a gallows. And I use the word in here, punct, P-U-N-C-T, as in puncture. And then there's a bit of lore in here, which I grew up hearing, which is that if a snapping turtle bites you, he won't let go until lightning comes. And there are any number of snakes in here. Many of them will be familiar to all of you. So the poem comes in two little parts: a little introduction at the beginning, like a little prelude to tell you what's going on, and then the boys do their knot song. Duet. Had we voice, a braid reed voice, our good throats restored, our lock stitch cord, we would crudel keen could breathe, our lodged, our locked unsaids, duet our not thought knowns. That this fear axe weighs caustic on the walls of the mind, that it gibbet looms over us, gleam breathing, pendulating, all the time fixing to fall. That a body gets, a soul gets, fostered same by beauty, sure by fear. That sure as fangs a threat pestered, sheeny cottonmouth gon' gape. That this whip shape underfoot and pine straw, more a diamondback turned flinchy. That the leaf crinching, cold coiled copperheads will spring. That once upon a switchblade spring, a man, a cruddy truck coerced us off. That the annals, they will show how young and green. That a snapping turtle's jaw beak puncts you like a bear trap, stays sunk and neat till lightning. That some are bent to hunt, to use a thing, or eat, or crush it, since they can. That we ourselves would kick dent and axe batter any innocent flank of galvanized for noise. That anyhow trust the skinny scent hounds to backtrack more or less their track to home exactly. That our mother salt saves food for the end of the world. So this next poem is one of the oldest tales known to humans, and unfortunately it's with us, it's alive with us right now, alas. And that is the story of the stranger come to town. A stranger comes to town and, well, apparently everyone loses their mind. So mostly this is a poem. It's, when we're talking about a stranger come to town, the world gets divided, of course, into the them and the they on the one side and the stranger on the other side. So most of this poem is the them and the they speaking because their obsession is getting talked about. But in one instance, we hear her, it is a her, we hear her speaking. Stranger. They would congregate right regular in the dirt lot of the First Baptist or alongside that abattoir off the Brack Creek. The hot meat of the matter being to parse patch what they'd heard of what she was. Marrow-wise, what she was to them was foreign-faced, not natural, not from here, of no known rhizomatic strain, nor kith, nor kin. Word said and worded spread, she's some flotsam from that load of those what flooded here by boat. Say they bought some bait from off her cart, how they'd pincer snatch their change like she was hot. Pink dew worms I got, fish eyes and roaches, live minnows for cheap, chicken neck gristle, no crickets. Her uncreased neck, her every body part, their snack. Theirs to eyeball eat and memorize, to judge, to pass from each to each, from mouth to ear. Have you smelled the hair on her? Have you bagged a feel of leg? Would you could always put a bag on her. Why is she all the time banshee and bent down, dawn sweeping her dirt? Possessed by slingstone, fireball bags of shit, they torched her yard. Wouldn't they congregate right regular? By time and ire, her rent house formed a skin of dunt and char. So Richard alluded to writing about the Low Country, and I kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I say, yes, that's absolutely what I'm doing, and then sometimes I object to it strenuously and say that I'm writing about, an imagined place that I have kind of cooked up. But needless to say, many people have asked in reviews or in person even, well, why do you always write about the same place, or why is it necessary to create, a place from which to write? Why is your work so based in place, and so on? I never have a great answer for that, but I raised two possibilities. One is the great writer Bernadette Mayer has this great line, and that is, everything there is, everywhere there is, has everything there is to look at. And that, to me, that is a child's place too, right? So when you're a child, the only world you know is the world you know, right? And that is the world, right? So everywhere there is has everything there is to look at. So, and also the great radio personality in Los Angeles called Michael Silverblatt. He has this wonderful radio show called Bookworm. You should listen to it sometime. It's a podcast. But he said in a conversation with me, he said, what if everything that ever happened where you live? And that's really, we really got to what's kind of at the center of this book, which is that every story that's ever happened on my watch, happened in my world, right? So the stranger comes to town, two brothers get sundered, etc. What if everything that ever happened where you lived? And I just love that. So all praise to, as one poem in my book says, stake your scrag of ground with what you've got, right? All praise to claiming your scrag of ground and paying very, very close attention to it. And that's what this poem is about. And it's called Caw, C-A-W, the sound that a bird makes. And it's in the voice of a bird. And then, of course, there's a fantastic cameo in this poem by an angel oak. So I've had to explain to people not from here what an angel oak is. And then there's a wonderful old word in here, carking. To cark is to fret or to worry. Now, that's not something I do, but maybe you do. Right? So this poem is called Caw. Whose branch this is, I think you know, by how my question marks as claws inscritch the bark. How my worry work along this bough runs back and forth and copper keen and evermore. I got mocked and nicked, no flybird, not for nothing. Not for nothing have I picked this oak, though not thick trunk ancient as some angel oak. It's sure the highest of our high, so suits my lack. Charred wings won't lift. I've got no glide nor span to speak of. Ain't this my beat, my usual limb? Ain't this pecking, carking pulse, my far and wide? And then while we're on birds, birds are so fascinating in that many of them have a wonderful, in their gullet there somewhere, they have a gizzard. And the gizzard then quite helpfully helps them to grind up things that won't go down, right? So, a chicken scratches in the yard, picks up all the gravel, and then the gizzard helps them deal with some of that gravel. So that would be a handy thing to have, don't you think? So this poem leans very heavily on Emily Dickinson. So Emily Dickinson, you'll remember in poem number 861, asks us to split the lark and you'll find the music. Bulb after bulb in silver rolled. It's quite, and then she gets quite gross from there and talks about how, talks about all of the other stuff that you would find if you split the lark wide open. So this relies upon that poem, and it's called Craw. And of course, we all know the expression of getting something stuck in your craw. So Craw. Split the boy, his thorax, throat. Pierce peel the craw. A jag-crystalled crust, his black scoria, slag. Not bulb after bulb in silver rolled. What no gizzard ground could hope to grind, what will not mesh, what will not smelt, embedded, undigested there in meat. So now we're getting to the closing. Couple poems here about there's a little issue in the world of this book with the fathers. As it turns out, there's a little issue in my first book about the fathers. So this poem, this is one of the choruses Richard mentioned in the book that has multiple short poems that are called choruses. And this poem is called Chorus Knell, Knell, like the tolling of a bell or a death knell. It's a very, very short poem, so pay attention. Knell. We low on daddies hereabouts, the fathers all but gone. Our lack of weight, a shape, a dry bone lake, by war, by drink, by gun, by drift. The fathers all but gone. So in this next poem, the father, the situation of the fathers is a situation, and the central speaker in this poem, Tammy, does some speaking in the poem, so I'll try and make you aware of the fact that she's speaking. Of course, I don't need to tell anybody here who's been out to the marshes recently about the lovely, melodious, flatulent black pluff mud. But again, I do have to tell people who aren't from here about black pluff. And so this is oak. We were all of us empty of its heft, and Tammy could tell. Being she herself was wildling, loose strife weed, undaddied, same as us. Flung chaff motes that we were, she saw to tell us time and time that yonder oak, its bark and bulk. She harped on it. She rendered. Instilled, elucidated tree nests, piece by part. Have I said yet, howsoever she'd have told us, it was never it to her, but him. As in, I school myself, I climb the bluff, I follow, feel the roots of him. They river bound, they gnarling up from mud, black pluff. He veins the bank. Some say, word was, that her fleet-blooded actual daddy jacked the toll through, humps the trains. She dwelled on it. She brooded, elaborated, fleshed for us, especially much, his arms. How one mossy bronze span she favored had been scathed, engraved along its length by lightning. How the long, muscled, strict, striated river hanging over one would hold. You could loop a rope there, near about the bicep, wrap you up a wide horsehead knot to grip, to ride good, rid fear. Let's not feature no black flow flowing down below. Cling strong till your hands numb, till your blood goes. Swing low. You could bellow, you could holler while you're at it, bending with you not to break. You could set yourself sway until kingdom come, till he hears you, till he weighs you. You could ring rightful like the tongue of a bell. Okay. So prisoners of war. So all of us of a certain age remember the prisoners of war, and how we wore the little bracelets, the POW bracelets. And in my world, in the North area, every single young man went to war, and many of them didn't come back. And the ones who did come back were messed up. And of course, I have a poem in my first book about the trauma of that. And this is a poem that's a little brighter because Johnny Pep, who appears in one of the poems in the book earlier in the book, was a prisoner of war, and now he's come back. And while he doesn't say anything in one of the poems to the boys that he meets, in this poem, he makes a little song and he sings to tell you a little bit about what happened to him. So for everyone here, voked is evoked or invoked, your choice, but voked. When I say reined, I'm talking about a horse, R-E-I-N-E-D, and indeed there's a hoss or a horse in this poem. And so the little head note is Johnny Pep, POW, and this is his song, and it's called Ladder. When they flanged me down that hole, I clawed for home. When they sealed the seam with clay, sucked roots and ore. When my gut would grind with groan of lack, I voked some meat. When I was blinded underground, I seen our creek. When stench would stain the mind would branch. When I got stripped and roped to stand for sleep, I reined my horse. When cane straps flogged us across the field, we'd call a tune. When rows of welts still grave the mind will climb. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to read my last poem now. This poem is called Thicket, and it has a little epigraph from a medieval Irish work, and that epigraph is, "It's juices that have greened my chin." And I'll just remind you that a lumen is a measurement of light, which you read on your light bulb packages, if they still sell light bulbs. And it also, though, a lumen is also the hollow space in a vein or a stem of a plant or any hollow tube. There's the outside thing, and then the negative space in the center is called the lumen, and that's important for this poem. And then you have heard tonight about a character called Tynan, who was one of the Tobacco Boys. There's another character mentioned in here, which you haven't heard from, called Clary. But so she makes an appearance here, and she, in her poem, she makes a cart out of a tree trunk and she drags it around behind her all the time. And so she is in here with her cart. Thicket. We come gnawed by need on hands and knees. As a creature nosing, grubble seeks the spring. As bendy spined as bandy snakes through salt shrub, yawping, needle break. For darkling green, for thorns surround, this absorbing, quaggy, crample ground. Of briar canes intervolved with kudzu mesh and mold. Of these convoluted vines we grasp to suck, to taste the pith, the lumen, the cell sap flux, to try to know some sour, sharp something about something. Lumen is as lumen does. A little room for turmoil to grow lucid in. Leaf whelmed in here, where Clary sets her cart tongue down and blinks and craves. In here, where Tynan breathes. We grasp to suck to taste what light. Let loose the veil that bows us down. Bow down. Thank you. So I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. If you need to run out, please don't feel that you need to stay. But if anybody wants to ask any questions, or if we have any questions coming in the chat from the Zoom, I'm happy to talk about anything.
Can you talk about your seminar, your workshop on Saturday?
Oh, yeah. So my seminar, that's a fancy name for what's actually going to happen. So as Richard says, I ain't never been to a seminar. You know, I ain't never been to a class, but I do have my opinions, right? So Professor Capital, I mean, small p, which is to say, I will profess my loves and interests to you. So in the seminar, I'm calling it the Punctum and the Phosphorus. So there's a wonderful idea from Roland Barthes about punctum, and he talks about photography and talks about how he looks for punctum. So you have to come to learn about what punctum means and what it means in photography and what it means to me in poetry. And the phosphorus is a little nod to William Carlos Williams, who talked about wanting to find the phosphorus of life in the work that he writes and the work that he loved. So we're basically going to talk about poems that I love, that I think have incredible punctum, and we're going to try and figure out how they get that in there. And we're just going to, you know, of course I have 100 too many poems for the 2 hours that we have together, but it will be fun, I promise. Yes.
Can you read something from the first book before you leave us?
I would be happy to. Can I, is that a Zoom question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have something chosen, and I'll do that at the end, right before we stop. Okay, perfect. Yes, sir, Richard.
When you were in school during the civil rights era, like high school,
Sorry, what was the first part?
you were in high school during the civil rights era.
No. No. You know, by the time I was in school, schools were intergated, as they say. The schools were intergated, and indeed, I mean, what I always like to say is once I got out of elementary school, and we didn't have middle school in those days, we went from elementary school right to high school. And when I went to high school, I studied in a quite Black environment. And it's something that I feel, you know, makes me feel quite wealthy. Once I went to high school and all the feeder schools merged into this one environment, it was an environment that was, you know, very, as it were, culturally Black. I had a fantastic educational experience. In fact, one of my teachers from high school is here tonight. No. I sometimes will research little details because I need like the name of a plant or flower, like Yawpin or something that I stuck in there. So I'll sometimes refresh my memory about that sort of thing. But I'm sorry to say that the poem Striplings about the tobacco boys, I'm sorry to say I have firsthand knowledge of that situation, which was quite a bit scarier than the poem lets on, although the poem is plenty scary. Yeah, but it's interesting that you mentioned that, because not long after I finished the poem, there was an incredible story in the New York Times including a little bit of video about not these kind of off the books, kind of tobacco workers, but about the horrors of tobacco farming. So not only is tobacco creating all kinds of problems, on the back end or on the front end, on the back end, of course, it's, heavily toxic, a lot of pesticides. And of course, when you've got migrant workers or you've got nameless, faceless boys, without their parents, you can spray whatever you want on them. So it's a rough deal coming and going, as they say. Yeah. Okay, so we have a fantastic bookseller here tonight, and they moved heaven and earth to get books here tonight. So they would very much like for you all to join me at their table in the back to sign some books, and then we can share some more stories, and I'm happy to answer any more questions there. And then I'm asked, because the Zoom, we don't want to discriminate against the Zoom population. So what's so funny about this poem is that I always like to say it's the one kind of sex poem in my first book, because it really was kind of the submerged story in my mind, at least, whether or not it comes across in the poem. The thing kind of propelling it along was kind of the kind of coming to sexuality of the boy character. So that's kind of an understory. And the other understory is really a compositional one, which is I wanted to do something that was kind of like old slideshows that we had in elementary school. There's no action, there's no video. It's like frame, 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 right? So I thought, I'm going to write a poem that's basically just one noun after another and make the story that way. So this is called film strip. Remember film strips? Yeah. Bait boy, minnow naked, neck to belt, chigger bit and calamine, powder pinkish, chalk nickels, spackle scales, nipple jots like dimes, buckets, sperm team, some silver sides, prime tad tails, Creole crickets, red worms, cottonmouthy creek prong, marsh musk, trailer husks, wrong water swale, and back sloughs, back beyond. Lure spore of brack beyond, fox track, slip slug mussels, gristle snails, coarse boar hairs, rumor, trace of wild man, ruts of root man, king snake, snipe cocks, rock skink, snappers, crink of boot man, funk of shack man, fire coals, leg traps, tackle pile, tires, tar paper, belt man, salt man, short shuck, shack.
That was extraordinary. I didn't want the evening to go any further without mentioning this. I don't know how it hasn't already come up, but Atsuro came to us from New York and not from California because he was up at the Penn Awards where he was a finalist and sadly did not win. I can't really imagine the book that could beat what we just heard tonight. So it must be incredible. Yes, we'll get on with the social part of the evening, and the books are back there, and thank you so much. It's been 11 and a half years since he was here, and through those years, I've always thought he was the best reader I ever saw, and I started to wonder if maybe I was making that up. But I mean, it happened again tonight, so thank you. All right. I'll get out of here. And thank you everyone who joined us on Zoom. Appreciate it. And I hope, and I'd like to get some feedback if the sound was good this time, because last time it was not. So, but anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. What's that?
I've been asked by the bookseller to remind everyone here, if you've had friends that couldn't come tonight or whatever, So around the lunch hour in Buxton Book Signing.
Okay, that's right after your workshop. Yeah. Oh, good, good. Yeah, that workshop is, yeah, it's 10 to noon. It is here. It's going to be in a room in the back. They have another big setup going on Saturday, but it will happen. Thank you. Good night.